The quiet is the most dangerous part of the war. It is a deafening, manufactured silence that hangs over the front lines like a shroud before a storm breaks. On May 19th, President Zelensky issued a single, cold directive that echoed through the halls of power and sent shockwaves deep into the Kremlin. He approved the long-range action plans for June. He offered no details, no map coordinates, and no tactical specifics. Just a simple, blunt affirmation that the gears of a massive, coordinated offensive are already turning. For those who have watched this conflict unfold for years, this specific brand of silence is a harbinger. We saw it in the summer of 2024, right before the shock invasion of Kursk caught Moscow completely off guard. And we saw it again in 2025 before the methodical, surgical dismantling of Russian airfields during Operation Spiderweb. Now, as the summer of 2026 takes hold, the indicators are lining up with chilling precision. This is not just a skirmish or a localized breakthrough. It is the beginning of a strategic pivot that dwarfs anything we have seen in the last 2 years. We are talking about a theater of operations that stretches across hundreds of miles of broken, contested landscape where the sheer scale of the investment is staggering. The financial cost of this war has already surpassed the $300 billion mark, with international aid packages, internal military expenditures, and the massive industrial mobilization of both nations reaching levels not seen since the mid-20th century. More than 700,000 personnel are currently entangled in a grinding, high-intensity conflict that spans 11 time zones and defines the geopolitical future of the European continent. This is a clash between two fundamentally different doctrines. On one side, a legacy system relying on mass, sheer brute force, and the blunt instrument of numeric superiority, despite the fact that those numbers are increasingly failing to translate into actual ground held. On the other, an agile, technologically superior force that has mastered the art of the gap, finding the exact point where the enemy's defensive blanket is thinnest and tearing it wide open. For 2 years, Vladimir Putin has banked on the assumption that time was on his side, that he could simply outlast the resolve of his adversary and dictate the terms of a new regional order. He planned his spring offensive, poured fresh units into the meat grinder, and prepared to solidify his grip on occupied territory. But that plan is currently unraveling in real time. Every time he pulls forces to reinforce a flagging sector, he inadvertently leaves another flank exposed, forcing a desperate, frantic reshuffling of his limited reserves. The logistical infrastructure, once considered untouchable, is now under constant, calculated fire from long-range drones that reach out to hit targets over 200 miles behind the front. As the atmosphere grows thick with the tension of an impending unknown strike, the burning question remains for both the high command in Kyiv and the bunker in Moscow. If the master plan has been signed and the silence has begun, exactly which direction will the Iron Fist fall when the countdown finally hits zero? The answer to where the hammer falls is currently hidden within the iron logic of the battlefield. All signals point to a coordinated, multi-front pressure campaign designed to force a total collapse of Russian command and control. Look at the maps, and you see a theater that has been systematically segmented into isolated kill zones. In the north, the terrain is unforgiving and thick with forest, turning the Belgorod border into a potential graveyard for any force caught out of position. The rolling hills and deep ravines here, often muddy and treacherous under the spring thaw, dictate that movement is almost entirely restricted to established roads and rail lines. This is exactly where the trap is being set. By systematically pushing Russian forces back toward their own border from the Kupiansk direction, Ukraine is compressing them into a narrow corridor, roughly 30 miles deep, where their logistics can be strangled by precision fire. Once the supply routes are severed, the geography turns against the occupier. There is no room to maneuver, no depth for a tactical retreat, and nowhere to hide from the constant, watchful eyes of long-range surveillance drones. As we move toward the southern front, the tactical reality changes from dense woodland to the flat, open, and exposed plains of the Zaporizhia region. Here, the heat of the approaching summer dries the earth, turning the landscape into a fast-moving, high-stakes arena. For months, Russian engineers have poured thousands of tons of concrete and steel into elaborate defensive lines, trenches, and minefields spanning nearly 50 miles of depth. Yet, these static defenses are failing. The weather plays a critical role here, as the clear, cloudless skies provide a perfect hunting ground for high-altitude reconnaissance. We have seen a day-by-day progression where Ukrainian assault brigades, moving in small, highly mobile teams, are effectively bypassing the main defensive hubs rather than smashing into them head-on. They are isolating these nodes, creating gaps that are often 10 to 15 miles wide and pouring through to strike rear-area command posts. The movement of troops through this terrain requires a mastery of timing. Because the Russian front is so heavily saturated with electronic warfare and drone sensors, moving a single battalion requires a surgical precision that is difficult to fathom. Imagine columns of infantry and armored units navigating a landscape where every 3 miles puts them within range of a strike, forcing them to move in the cover of night or through the dense tree lines that still offer a sliver of concealment when they reach their forward positions. They do not dig in the traditional sense. They establish what commanders call floating defenses, shifting locations every few hours to avoid detection. The distance between the current front line and the critical strategic rear logistics hubs is now being bridged by a constant daily rain of mid-range fire. Every 24 hours, we see the cumulative impact of these small, localized advances. A village here, a rail junction there, a hilltop captured at night. It is a slow, grinding process of territorial erosion that keeps the enemy in a constant state of reactive panic. The Russian command structure, stretched thin across a 600-mile front, is struggling to keep pace with these shifting realities. They are forced to shift reserves from the south to the north and then back to the south, covering hundreds of miles in a matter of days. This constant, exhausting redeployment is exactly what the Ukrainian command is counting on. They are forcing the enemy to burn through fuel, ammunition, and morale, all while moving toward a final decisive strike. It is a brilliant, cold-blooded game of cat and mouse, played across thousands of square miles of war-torn territory, where a single mistake in spacing or a few minutes of hesitation can lead to the total destruction of an entire brigade. But even the most brilliant tactical maneuvers, the most clever flanking movements, and the most precise infiltration of enemy lines are fundamentally theoretical concepts. On the ground, these maneuvers are merely ink on a map if they are not backed by the cold mechanical reality of the battlefield. Because all of these brilliant tactics mean absolutely nothing without the actual machines of war. The machinery of this war has evolved into a high-stakes race between industrial-scale production and technological adaptation. At the heart of the Ukrainian arsenal sits the M142 HIMARS, a system that has become the gold standard for mobile precision strike capability. On paper, it is a masterclass in versatility. Using the ATAC-M's missile, it can reach out and strike targets up to 186 miles away, with a 500-pound blast fragmentation warhead. Its mobility is its greatest asset. Mounted on a 5-ton truck, it can reposition in minutes, making it incredibly difficult for the Russians to track and destroy. However, combat reality has exposed the cracks in this armor. The Russians have adapted by utilizing AI-equipped loitering munitions like modified Geron, 2 drones that can autonomously hunt for the electromagnetic signatures of launchers. When a system costing hundreds of thousands of dollars is hunted by a drone that costs a fraction of that, the economics of the battlefield shift violently. The HIMARS remains lethal, but it is no longer the invisible predator it was during its debut. It is now part of a dangerous high-speed game of tag where a single drone strike can permanently silence a launcher. The air domain is similarly defined by the struggle between the Russian S-400 Triumph and the relentless wave of Ukrainian drone swarms. The S-400 is arguably the most capable air defense system in the Russian inventory, boasting an engagement range of up to 370 miles and the ability to track dozens of targets simultaneously with its advanced phased array radar. Yet, even this Titan has shown its fragility. In 2026, we have seen a systematic degradation of these batteries, with over 80 systems neutralized since March alone. The flaw isn't just in the radar or the interceptors. It is in the system's inability to process the sheer volume of data produced by low-cost, high-density drone swarms. When faced with hundreds of cheap, disposable FPV drones, some now operating autonomously, with AI targeting to bypass electronic jamming, the S-400's logic gates reach their breaking point. It is an industrial paradox. A billion-dollar battery designed to stop supersonic missiles is being slowly picked apart by a swarm of drones that cost less than a family sedan. On the other side of the ledger, Russian air power has doubled down on the UMPK glide bomb. These are not high-tech, precision-guided cruise missiles. They are Soviet-era FAB, 500 or FAB, 1500 bombs retrofitted with folding wings and GPS correction kits. A Su-34 fighter bomber can release these from 45 miles away, turning a basic gravity bomb into a terror weapon with a massive 3,000-pound payload that can collapse even the deepest bunkers. The fatality rate for infantry caught in these impact zones is horrific, but the logistical nightmare for the Russian aerospace forces is real. Every glide bomb release requires a dedicated flight path and a vulnerable aircraft. And as Ukraine continues to peel away the outer layers of Russian radar, the Su-34s are being pushed further back, decreasing their accuracy and forcing them to expend more munitions to achieve the same effect. The battlefield has become a crucible where expensive, long-range platforms are constantly under threat from cheap, mass-produced, and increasingly autonomous technology. We are seeing a shift where the capability of a system is defined not by its raw specs like Mach speeds or explosive yields, but by its resilience to electronic warfare and its ability to exist within a network-centric environment. The days of relying on a single silver bullet weapon system are long gone. Success now belongs to whoever can maintain the most stable link, the fastest data processing, and the most consistent supply of expendable platforms. As these machines of war clash across the front, the true cost is beginning to bleed beyond the trenches and into the boardrooms and national treasuries, bringing us to a sobering realization that modern wars are not just fought with the physical kinetic energy of bullets and missiles, but with the cold, hard endurance of geopolitical warfare. The true grinding cost of this conflict is no longer measured solely in the thousands of miles of scorched earth or the sheer tonnage of steel expended on the front. We have arrived at a point where the kinetic violence of the battlefield is merely the tip of a much larger, more suffocating spear. While the world watches the movement of tanks and the arcs of missiles, the real war is being fought in the dark through the strangulation of economies and the slow, agonizing collapse of the internal social fabric that keeps a nation functioning. Russia is currently facing an economic architecture that is systematically being dismantled piece by piece. The sanctions imposed by the West have evolved from blunt, broad-spectrum tools into surgical strikes against specific, high-value nodes like the oil export hubs, the high-speed rail networks, and the vital, digitized logistics chains that provide the nervous system for their military-industrial complex. Every time a major refinery is crippled by a strike, it is not just a loss of fuel for the tanks in the field, it is a direct hit to the national revenue required to pay the soldiers and sustain the regime's legitimacy. The paradox of this conflict is increasingly visible to everyone from the Kremlin to the average citizen in Moscow or St. Petersburg. The more the government pushes the narrative of a fight for survival, the more they accelerate the very conditions that make that survival impossible. We are seeing a profound disconnect between the high-level propaganda of the state and the bleak, cold reality on the ground. When the promise of a glorious, short, and decisive victory turns into years of attrition, and the quiet, desperate reality of mass desertion, the social contract begins to fracture. The recent trend of desertion, with over 100 soldiers convicted every single week, is just the visible symptom of a deeper, systemic rot. Behind closed doors, even the most ardent proponents of the war are whispering about the potential for another 1,991, an outcome that is no longer a fringe fear, but a central driving concern for the ruling class. They are trying to hold together a blanket that is far too small for the size of the crisis they have invited upon themselves. And with every pull in one direction, they only expose another fatal tear in their armor. This is the ultimate heavy price of this war. It is not just the loss of human capital or the burning of billions in military hardware. It is the realization that a nation cannot simultaneously project power across 11 time zones, occupy foreign territory, and sustain a failing domestic economy while the foundations of its own authority are crumbling beneath its feet. Russia is being forced to choose between the front and the rear, between the defense of the border and the integrity of the state. And in that impossible choice, they are losing on every front. As we watch the silence of these next few weeks, we are witnessing the final phase of a strategy that has already been tested, refined, and set in motion. The question is no longer whether the system can hold, but when it will finally reach its absolute breaking point under the weight of its own internal contradictions. We are entering a period of history that will be studied for generations, a time where the unexpected has become the only predictable outcome. As Ukraine prepares its next move in the shadows, it is clear that the map of this conflict is about to shift in ways we cannot yet fully grasp. But what do you think is the single most critical factor in this stalemate? Is it the sheer weight of Russian numbers? Or is the future of this war entirely dictated by the technological superiority of the drone and the intelligence revolution? I want you to sound off in the comments section below and let me know your take on where this will all end. If you found this deep dive into the strategy and the shadows of the front lines valuable, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a briefing. We will be tracking every development as it happens, so stay tuned for the next update.